everyone, and welcome back to the Reading Corner. I'm your host, Renee, and I am here for you every Wednesday reading stories from the public domain. We are currently reading The Daughter of Time by Josephine Tey, and without further ado, let's get into it.
Chapter 8. "Well," said Marta when she came again, "what did you think of my woolly lamb?" "It was very kind of you to find him for me." "I didn't have to find him. He's continually underfoot. He practically lives at the theatre. He must have seen To Sea in a Bowl 500 times. When he isn't in Atlanta's dressing room, he's out front. I wish they'd get married, and then we might see less of him. They're not even living together, you know. It's all pure idle." She dropped her actress voice for a moment and said, "They're rather sweet together. In some ways they are more like twins than lovers. They have that utter trust in each other, that dependence on the other half to make a proper whole. And they never have rows or even quarrels that I can see. An idyll, as I said. Was it Brent who brought you this?" She poked at the solid bulk of Oliphant with a doubtful finger. "Yes, he left it with the porter for me." "It looks very indigestible." "A bit unappetizing, let us say. It is quite easily digested once you have swallowed it. History for the student, set out in detailed fact." "Ugh!" "At least I've discovered where the Reverend and sainted Sir Thomas More got his account of Richard." "Oh, yes? Where?" "From one John Morton." "I've never heard of him." "Neither did I, but that's our ignorance." "Who was he?" "He was Henry VII's Archbishop of Canterbury, and Richard's bitterest enemy." If Marta had been capable of whistling, she would have whistled in comment. "So that was the horse's mouth," she said. "That was the horse's mouth, and it is on that account of Richard that all the latter ones were built. It is on that story that Holinshed fashioned his history, and on that story that Shakespeare fashioned his character." "So it was the version of someone who hated Richard. I didn't know that. Why did the sainted Sir Thomas report Morton rather than someone else?" "Whoever he reported, it would be a Tudor version. But he reported Morton, it seems, because he had been in Morton's household as a boy, and of course Morton had been very much on in the act. So it was natural to write down the version of an eye-witness whose account he could have at first hand." Marta poked her finger at Oliphant again. "Does your dull, fat historian acknowledge that this is a biased version?" "Oliphant? Only by implication. He is, to be honest, in a sad muddle himself about Richard. On the same page he says that he was an admirable administrator and general, with an excellent reputation, staid and good living, very popular by contrast with the Woodville upstarts, the Queen's relations, and that he was perfectly unscrupulous and ready to wade through any depth of bloodshed to the crown which lay within his grasp. On one page he says grudgingly, there are reasons for supposing that he was not destitute of a conscience, and then on a later page reports More's picture of a man so tormented by his own deed that he could not sleep, and so on." "Does your dull fat Oliphant prefer his roses red, then?" "Oh, I don't think so. I don't think he is consciously Lancastrian, though now that I think of it, he is very tolerant of Henry VII's usurpation. I can't remember his saying anywhere, brutally, that Henry hadn't a vestige of a shadow of a claim on the throne." "Who put him there, then? Henry, I mean." "The Lancastrian remnant and the upstart Woodvilles, backed, I suppose, by a country revolted by the boy's murder. Apparently anyone with a spice of Lancastrian blood in their veins would do. Henry himself was canny enough to put conquest first in his claim to the throne, and his Lancaster blood second. De jure belli et de jure Lancastre. His mother was the heir of an illegitimate son of the third son of Edward III. All I know about Henry VII is that he was fantastically rich and fantastically mean. Do you know the lovely Kipling story about his knighting the craftsman, not for having done beautiful work, but for having saved him the cost of some scroll work? With a rusty sword from behind the arras. You must be one of the few women who know their Kipling. Oh, I am a very remarkable woman in many ways. So you are no nearer finding out about Richard's personality than you were? No, I'm as completely bewildered as Sir Cuthbert Oliphant, bless his heart. The only difference between us is that I know I'm bewildered, and he doesn't seem to be aware of it. Have you seen much of my woolly lamb? I've seen nothing of him since his first visit, and that was 3 days ago. I'm beginning to wonder whether he has repented of his promise. Oh no, I'm sure not. Faithfulness is his banner and creed. Like Richard. Richard? His motto was, Loyauté me lie. Loyalty binds me. There was a tentative tap at the door, and in answer to Grant's invitation, Brent Carradine appeared, hung around with topcoat as usual. Oh, I seem to be butting in. I didn't know you were here, Miss Hallard. I met the Statue of Liberty in the corridor there, and she seemed to think you were alone, Mr. Grant. Grant identified the Statue of Liberty without difficulty. Martha said that she was in the act of going, and that in any case Brent was a much more welcome visitor than she was nowadays. She would leave them in peace to pursue their search for the soul of a murderer. When he had bowed her politely to the door, Brent came back and sat himself down in the visitor's chair with exactly the same air that an Englishman wears when he sits down to his port after the women have left the table. Grant wondered if even the female-ridden American felt a subconscious relief at settling down to a stag party. In answer to Brent's inquiry as to how he was getting on with Oliphant, he said he found Sir Cuthbert admirably lucid. I've discovered who the cat and the rat were, incidentally. They were entirely respectable knights of the realm, William Catesby and Richard Ratcliffe. Catesby was Speaker of the House of Commons, and Ratcliffe was one of the Commissioners of Peace with Scotland. It's odd how the very sound of words makes a political jingle vicious. The hog, of course, was Richard's badge, the white boar. Do you frequent our English pubs? Sure, they're one of the things I think you do better than us. You forgive us our plumbing for the sake of the beer at the Boar. I wouldn't go so far as to say I forgive it. I discount it, shall we say. Magnanimous of you. Well, there's something else you've got to discount. That theory of yours, that Richard hated his brother because of the contrast between his beauty and Richard's hunchback state. According to Sir Cuthbert, the hunchback is a myth. So is the withered arm. It appears that he had no visible deformity, at least none that mattered. His left shoulder was lower than his right, that was all. Did you find out who the contemporary historian is? There isn't one. None at all? Not in the sense that you mean it. There were writers who were contemporaries of Richard, but they wrote after his death, for the Tudors, which puts them out of court. There is a monkish chronicle in Latin somewhere that is contemporary, but I haven't been able to get a hold of it yet. One thing I have discovered, though, that account of Richard III is called Sir Thomas More's, not because he wrote it, but because the manuscript was found among his papers. It was an unfinished copy of an account that appears elsewhere, in finished form. Well, Grant considered this with interest. You mean it was Moore's own manuscript copy? Yes, in his own writing, made when he was about 35. In those days, before printing was general, manuscript copies of books were the usual thing. Yes. So if the information came from John Morton, as it did, it is just as likely that the thing was written by Morton. Yeah. Which would certainly account for the lack of sensibility. A climber like Morton wouldn't be at all abashed by backstair gossip. Do you know about Morton? No. He was a lawyer turned churchman, and the greatest pluralist on record. He chose the Lancastrian side and stayed with it until it was clear that Edward IV was home and dried. Then he made his peace with the York side, and Edward made him Bishop of Ely, and vicar of God knows how many parishes besides. But after Richard's accession, he backed first the Woodvilles, and then Henry Tudor, and ended up with a cardinal's hat as Henry VII's Archbishop of— "Wait a minute," said the boy, amused. "Of course I know Morton. He was Morton of Morton's Fork. You can't be spending much, so how about something for the king? You're spending such a lot, you must be very rich, so how about something for the king?" Yes, that Morton, Henry's best thumbscrew. And I've just thought of a reason why he might have a personal hatred for Richard long before the murder of the boys. Yes? Edward took a large bribe from Louis XI to make a dishonorable peace in France. Richard was very angry about that. It really was a disgraceful affair, and washed his hands of the business, which included refusing a large cash offer. But Morton was very much in favor both of the deal and the cash. Indeed, he took a pension from Louis. A very nice pension it was, 2,000 crowns a year. I don't suppose Richard's outspoken comments went down very well, even with good gold for a chaser. No, I guess not. And of course there would be no preferment for Morton under the straight-laced Richard, as there had been under the easy-going Edward. So he would have taken the Woodville side, even if there had been no murder. About the murder, the boy said, and paused. Yes? About the murder of those two boys. Isn't it odd that no one talks of it? How do you mean, no one talks of it? These last 3 days I've been going through contemporary papers, letters and whatnot, and no one mentions them at all. Perhaps they were afraid to. It was a time when it paid to be discreet. Yes, but I'll tell you something even odder. You know that Henry brought a bill of attainder against Richard after Bosworth. Before Parliament, I mean. Well, he accuses Richard of cruelty and tyranny, but doesn't even mention the murder. What? Said Grant, startled. Yes, you may as well look startled. Are you sure? Quite sure. But Henry got possession of the Tower immediately on his arrival in London after Bosworth. If the boys were missing, it is incredible that he should not publish the fact immediately. It was the trump card in his hand. He lay in surprised silence for a little. The sparrows on the window-sill quarrelled loudly. "I can't make sense of it," he said. "What possible explanation can there be for his omission to make capital out of the fact that the boys were missing?" Brent shifted his long legs to a more comfortable position. "There's only one explanation," he said, "and that's that the boys weren't missing." There was a still longer silence this time, while they stared at each other. "Oh no, it's nonsense," Grant said. "There must be some obvious explanation that we are failing to see." "And what, for instance?" "I don't know. I haven't had time to think." "I've had nearly 3 days to think, and I still haven't thought up a reason that will fit." Nothing will fit the facts except the conclusion that the boys were alive when Henry took over the tower. It was a completely unscrupulous act of attainder. It accused Richard's followers, the loyal followers of an anointed king, fighting against an invader, of treason. Every accusation that Henry could possibly make with any hope of getting away with it was to put it into that bill, and the very worst he could accuse Richard of was the usual cruelty and tyranny. The boys aren't even mentioned. It's fantastic. It's unbelievable, but it is fact. What it means is that there was no contemporary accusation at all. That's about it. But wait a minute. Tyrrell was hanged for the murder. He actually confessed to it before he died. Wait a minute. He reached for Oliphant and sped through the pages looking for the place. There's a full account of it here somewhere. There was no mystery about it. Even the Statue of Liberty knew about it. Who? The nurse you met in the corridor. It was Tyrrell who committed the murder, and he was found guilty and confessed before his death. Was that when Henry took over London, then? Wait a moment. Here it is. He skimmed down the paragraph. No, it was in 1502. He realized all of a sudden what he had just said and repeated in a new, bewildered tone. In 1502. But that was, yes, nearly 20 years afterwards. Brent fumbled for his cigarette case, took it out, and then put it hastily away again. Smoke if you like, Grant said. It's a good stiff drink I need. I don't think my brain can be working very well. I feel the way I used to feel as a child when I was blindfolded and whirled around before beginning a blind man's buff game. Yeah, said Carradine. He took out a cigarette and lighted it. Completely in the dark, and more than a little dizzy. He sat staring at the sparrows. 40 million schoolbooks can't be wrong, Grant said after a little. Can't they? Well, can they? I used to think so, but I'm not so sure nowadays. Aren't you being a little sudden in your skepticism? Oh, it wasn't this that shook me. What then? A little affair called the Boston Massacre. Ever heard of it? Of course. Well, I discovered quite by accident, when I was looking up something at college, that the Boston Massacre consisted of a mob throwing stones at a sentry. The total casualties were 4. I was brought up on the Boston Massacre, Mr. Grant. My 28-inch chest used to swell at the very memory of it. My good red spinach-laden blood used to seethe at the thought of helpless civilians mowed down by the fire of British troops. You can't imagine what a shock it was to find that all it added up to in actual fact was a brawl that wouldn't get more than local reporting in a clash between police and strikers in any American lockout. As Grant made no reply to this, he squinted his eyes against the light to see how Grant was taking it. But Grant was staring at the ceiling as if he were watching patterns forming there. That's partly why I like to research so much, Carradine volunteered, and settled back to staring at the sparrows. Presently, Grant put his hand out wordlessly, and Carradine gave him a cigarette and lighted it for him. They smoked in silence. It was Grant who interrupted the sparrow's performance. "Tony Pandy," he said. "How's that?" But Grant was still far away. "After all, I've seen the thing at work in my own day, haven't I?" he said, not to Carradine but to the ceiling. "It's Tony Pandy." "And what in the heck is Tony Pandy?" Brent asked. "Sounds like a patent medicine. Does your child get out of sorts? Does the little face get flushed, the temper short, and the limbs easily tired? Give the little one Tony Pandy and see the radiant results." And then, as Grant made no answer, "All right, then, keep your Tony Pandy. I wouldn't have it as a gift." "Tony Pandy," Grant said, still in that sleepwalking voice, "is a place in the south of Wales." I knew it was some kind of psychic. If you go to South Wales, you will hear that in 1910 the government used troops to shoot down Welsh miners who were striking for their rights. You'll probably hear that Winston Churchill, who was Home Secretary at the time, was responsible. South Wales, you will be told, will never forget Tony Pandy. Carradine had dropped his flippant air. And it wasn't a bit like that? The actual facts are these. The rougher section of the Rhondda Valley crowd had gotten quite out of hand. Shops were being looted and property destroyed. The chief constable of Glamorgan sent a request to the Home Office for troops to protect the lieges. If a chief constable thinks a situation serious enough to ask for the help of the military, a Home Secretary has very little choice in the matter. But Churchill was so horrified at the possibility of the troops coming face to face with a crowd of rioters and having to fire on them, that he stopped the movement of the troops and sent instead a body of plain, solid metropolitan police, armed with nothing but their rolled-up mackintoshes. The troops were kept in reserve, and all contact with the rioters was made by unarmed London police. The only bloodshed in the whole affair was a bloody nose or two. The Home Secretary was severely criticized in the House of Commons, incidentally, for his unprecedented intervention. That was Tony Pandy. That is the shooting down by troops that Wales will never forget. Yeah, Carradine said, considering. Yes, it's almost a parallel to the Boston affair. Someone blowing up a simple affair to huge proportions for political ends. The point is not that it is a parallel. The point is that every single man who was there knows that the story is nonsense, and yet it has never been contradicted. It will never be overtaken now. It is a completely untrue story, grown to legend, while the men who knew it to be untrue looked on and said nothing. Yes, that's very interesting. Very. History as it is made. Yes. History. Give me research. After all, the truth of anything at all doesn't lie in someone's account of it. It lies in all the small facts of the time, an advertisement in the paper, the sale of a house, the price of a ring. Grant went on looking at the ceiling, and the sparrow's clamor came back into the room. What amuses you? Grant said, turning his head at last and catching the expression on his visitor's face. This is the first time I've seen you look like a policeman. I'm feeling like a policeman. I'm thinking like a policeman. I'm asking myself the question that every policeman asks in every case of murder. Who benefits? And for the first time it occurs to me that the glib theory that Richard got rid of the boys to make himself safer on the throne is so much nonsense. Supposing he had got rid of the boys, there were still the boys' 5 sisters between him and the throne, to say nothing of George's 2, the boy and girl. George's son and daughter were barred by their father's attainder, but I take it that an attainder can be reversed, or annulled, or something. If Richard's claim was shaky, all those lives stood between him and safety. And did they all survive him? I don't know, but I shall make it my business to find out. The boy's eldest sister certainly did, because she became Queen of England as Henry's wife. Look, Mr. Grant, let's you and I start at the very beginning of this thing, without history books or modern versions or anyone's opinion about anything. Truth isn't in accounts, but in account books. A neat phrase, Grant said complimentary. Does it mean anything? It means everything. The real history is written in forms, not meant as history, in wardrobe accounts, in privy purse expenses, in personal letters, in estate books. If someone, say, insists that Lady Who's-it never had a child, and you find in the account book the entry, "For the son born to my lady on Michaelmas Eve, 5 yards of blue ribbon, 4 pence halfpenny," It's a reasonably fair deduction that my lady had a son on Michaelmas Eve." "Yes, I see. All right. Where do we begin?" "You're the investigator. I'm only the looker-upper." "Research worker." "Thanks. What do you want to know?" "Well, for a start, it would be useful, not to say enlightening, to know how the principals in the case reacted to Edward's death. Edward the Fourth, I mean. Edward died unexpectedly, and his death must have caught everyone on the hop. I'd like to know how the people concerned reacted." "That's straightforward and easy. I take it you mean what they did, and not what they thought." "Yes, of course. Only, historians tell you what they thought. Research workers stick to what they did." "What they did is all I want to know. I've always been a believer in the old saw that actions speak louder than words." "Incidentally, what does the sainted Sir Thomas say that Richard did when he heard that his brother was dead?" Brent wanted to know. "The sainted Sir Thomas, alias John Morton, says that Richard got busy being charming to the Queen and persuading her not to send a large bodyguard to escort the boy Prince from Ludlow, meanwhile cooking up a plot to kidnap the boy on his way to London. According to the sainted Moor, then, Richard meant from the very first to supplant the boy." "Oh, yes." "Well, we shall find out at least who was where and doing what, whether we can deduce their intentions or not." "That's what I want exactly." "Policeman," jibbed the boy, "where were you at 5 p.m. on the night of the 15th instant?" "It works," Grant assured him. "It works." "Well, I'll go away and work too. I'll be in again as soon as I've got the information you want. I'm very grateful to you, Mr. Grant. This is a lot better than the peasants." He floated away into the gathering dusk of the winter afternoon, his train-like coat giving an academic sweep and dignity to his thin young figure. Grant switched on his lamp and examined the pattern it made on the ceiling as if he had never seen it before. It was a unique and engaging problem that the boy had dropped so casually into his lap, as unexpected as it was baffling. What possible reason could there be for that lack of contemporary accusation? Henry had not even needed proof that Richard was himself responsible. The boys were in Richard's care. If they were not to be found when the tower was taken over, then that was far finer, thicker mud to throw at his dead rival than the routine accusations of cruelty and tyranny. Grant ate his supper without for one moment being conscious either of its taste or its nature. It was only when the Amazon, taking away his tray, said kindly, "Come now, that's a very good sign. Both rissoles all eaten up to the last crumb," that he became aware that he had partaken of a meal. For another hour he watched the lamp pattern on the ceiling, going over the thing in his mind, going round and round it, looking for some small crack that might indicate a way into the heart of the matter. In the end, he withdrew his attention altogether from the problem, which was his habit when a conundrum proved too round and smooth and solid for immediate solution. If he slept on the proposition, it might, tomorrow, show a facet that he had missed. He looked for something that might stop his mind from harking back to the act of attainder, and saw the pile of letters waiting to be acknowledged. Kind, well-wishing letters from all sorts of people, including a few old lags. The really likable old lags were an outmoded type, growing fewer and fewer daily. Their place had been taken by brash young thugs with not a spark of humanity in their egocentric souls, as illiterate as puppies and as pitiless as a circular saw. The old professional burglar was apt to be as individual as the member of any other profession, and as little vicious. Quiet little domestic men, interested in family holidays and the children's tonsils, or odd bachelors devoted to caged birds, or second-hand bookshops, or complicated and infallible betting systems. Old-fashioned types. No modern thug would write to say that he was sorry that a busy was laid aside. No such idea would ever cross a modern thug's mind. Writing a letter when laying on one's back is a laborious business, and Grant shied away from it. But the top envelope on the pile bore the writing of his cousin Laura, and Laura would become anxious if she had no answer at all from him. Laura and he had shared summer holidays as children, and had been a little in love with each other all through one Highland summer, and that made a bond between them that had never been broken. He had better send Laura a note to say that he was alive. He read her letter again, smiling a little, and the waters of the Turley sounded in his ears and slid under his eyes, and he could smell the sweet cold smell of a Highland moor in winter, and he forgot for a little that he was a hospital patient, and that life was sordid and boring and claustrophobic. Pat sends what would be his love if he were a little older or just a little younger. Being 9, he says, tell Allan I was asking for him, and has a fly of his own invention waiting to be presented to you when you come on sick leave. He is a little in disgrace at the moment in school, having learned for the first time that the Scots sold Charles I to the English, and having decided that he can no longer belong to such a nation. He is therefore, I understand, conducting a one-man protest strike against all things Scottish, and will learn no history, sing no song, nor memorize any geography pertaining to so deplorable a country. He announced, going to bed last night, that he has decided to apply for Norwegian citizenship. Grant took his letter-pad from the table and wrote in pencil, Dearest Laura, would you be unbearably surprised to learn that the princes in the Tower survived Richard III? As ever, Allan. P.S. I am nearly well again.
Chapter 9. Do you know that the bill attainting Richard III before Parliament didn't mention the murder of the princes in the Tower? Grant asked the surgeon next morning. Really? Said the surgeon. That's odd, isn't it? Extremely odd. Can you think of an explanation? Probably trying to minimize the scandal for the sake of the family. He wasn't succeeded by one of his family. He was the last of his line. His successor was the first Tudor, Henry VII. Yes, of course. I'd forgotten. I was never any good at history. I used to use the history period to do my home algebra. They don't manage to make history very interesting in schools. Perhaps more portraits might help. He glanced up at the Richard portrait and went back to his professional inspection. That is looking very nice and healthy, I'm glad to say. No pain to speak of now. And he went away, kindly and casual. He was interested in faces because they were part of his trade, but history was just something that he used for other purposes, something that he set aside in favor of algebra under the desk. He had living bodies in his care and the future in his hands. He had no thought to spare for problems academic. Matron, too, had more immediate worries. She listened politely while he put his difficulty to her, but he had the impression that she might say, I should see the almoner about it if I were you. It was not her affair. She looked down from her regal eminence at the great hive below her, buzzing with activity, all of it urgent and important. She could hardly be expected to focus her gaze on something more than 400 years away. He wanted to say, but you of all people should be interested in what can happen to royalty, in the frailness of your reputation's worth. Tomorrow, a whisper may destroy you. But he was already guiltily conscious that to hinder a matron with irrelevances was to lengthen her already lengthy morning round without reason or excuse. The midget did not know what an attainder was, and made it clear that she did not care. It's becoming an obsession with you, that thing, she said, leaning her head at the portrait. It's not healthy. Why don't you read some of those nice books? Even Marta, whose visit he had looked forward to so that he could put this odd new proposition to her and see her reaction, even Marta was too full of wrath with Madeline March to pay any attention to him. After practically promising me that she would write it, after all our get-togethers and my plans for when this endless thing finally comes to an end, I had even talked to Jacques about clothes, and now she decides that she must write one of her awful little detective stories. She says she must write it while it's fresh, whatever that is. He listened to Marta's grieving with sympathy. Good plays were the scarcest commodity in the world, and good playwrights worth their weight in platinum. But it was like watching something through a window. The 15th century was more actual to him this morning than any ongoings in Shaftesbury Avenue. I don't suppose it will take her long to write her detective book, he said comfortingly. Oh no, she does them in 6 weeks or so. But now that she's off the chain, how do I know that I'll ever get her on again? Tony Sevilla wants her to write a Marlborough play for him, and you know what Tony is when he sets his heart on something. He'd tuck the pigeons off the Admiralty Arch. She came back to the attainder problem briefly before she took her leave. There's sure to be some explanation, my dear, she said from the door. Of course there's an explanation, he wanted to shout after her. But what is it? The thing is against all likelihood and sense. Historians say that the murder caused a great revulsion of feeling against Richard, that he was hated for the crime by the common people of England, and that was why they welcomed a stranger in his place. And yet, when the tale of his wrongdoing is placed before Parliament, there's no mention of the crime. Richard was dead when that complaint was drawn up, and his followers in flight or exile. His enemies were free to bring against him any charge they could think of, and they had not thought of that spectacular murder. Why? The country was reputedly ringing with the scandal of the boy's disappearance, the very recent scandal. And when his enemies collected his alleged offenses against morality and the state, they had not included Richard's most spectacular piece of infamy. Why? Henry needed every small featherweight of advantage in the precarious newness of his accession. He was unknown to the country at large, and he had no right by blood to be where he was. But he hadn't used the overwhelming advantage that Richard's published crime would have given him. Why? He was succeeding a man of great reputation, known personally to the people from the marches of Wales to the Scots border, a man universally liked and admired until the disappearance of his nephews. And yet he omitted to use the one real advantage he had against Richard, the unforgivable, the abhorred thing. Why? Only the Amazon seemed concerned about the oddity that was engaging his mind, and she was not out of any feeling for Richard, but because her conscientious soul was distressed at any possibility of mistake. The Amazon would go all the way down the corridor and back again to tear off a page in a loose-leaf calendar that someone had forgotten to remove. But her instinct to be worried was less strong than her instinct to comfort. You don't need to worry about it, she said, soothing. There'll be quite some simple explanation that you haven't thought of. It'll come to you sometime when you're thinking of something else altogether. That's usually how I remember where something I've mislaid is. I'll be putting the kettle on in the pantry or counting the sterile dressings as Sister doles them out, and suddenly I'll think, goodness, I left it in my Burberry pocket, whatever the thing was, I mean, so you don't have to worry about it. Sergeant Williams was in the wilds of Essex, helping the local constabulary to decide who had hit an old shopkeeper over the head with a brass scale weight, and left her dead among the shoelaces and licorice all sorts. So there was no help from the yard. There was no help from anyone until young Carradine turned up again 3 days later. Grant thought that his normal insouciance had a deeper tinge than usual. There was almost an air of self-congratulation about him. Being a well-brought-up child, he inquired politely about Grant's physical progress, and having been reassured on that point, he pulled some notes out of the capacious pocket of his coat and beamed through his horn rims at his colleague. I wouldn't have the sainted Moor as a present, he observed pleasantly. You're not being offered him. There are no takers. He's away off the beam. Away off. I suspected as much. Let us have the facts. Can you begin on the day Edward died? Sure. Edward died on April the 9th, 1483. In London, I mean, in Westminster, which wasn't the same thing then. The Queen and the daughters were living there, and the younger boy, I think, the young prince, was doing lessons at Ludlow Castle in charge of the Queen's brother, Lord Rivers. The Queen's relations are very much to the fore, did you know? The place is just lousy with Woodvilles. Yes, I know. Go on. Where was Richard? On the Scottish border. What? Yeah, I said, on the Scottish border. Caught away off base. But does he yell for a horse and go posting off to London? He does not. What did he do? He arranged for a requiem mass at York, to which all the nobility of the north were summoned, and in his presence took an oath of loyalty to the young prince. Interesting, Grant said dryly. What did Rivers do, the Queen's brother? On the 24th of April, he set out with the prince for London, with 2,000 men and a large supply of arms. What did he want the arms for? Don't ask me, I'm only a research worker. Dorset, the elder of the Queen's 2 sons by her first marriage, took over both the arsenal and the treasure in the Tower and began to fit up ships to command the Channel. And council orders were issued in the name of Rivers and Dorset, Avunculus Regis, and Frater Regis ut Tyrannus, respectively, with no mention of Richard, which was decidedly off color when you remember, if you ever knew, that in his will Edward had appointed Richard guardian of the boy and protector of the kingdom in case of any minority. Richard alone, mind you, without a colleague. Yes, that is in character at least. He must always have had complete faith in Richard, both as a person and as an administrator. Did Richard come south with a young army too? No, he came with 600 gentlemen of the north, all in deep mourning. He arrived at Northampton on April the 29th. He had apparently expected to join up with the Ludlow crowd there, and that is report, and you have only a historian's word for it. But the Ludlow procession, Rivers and the young prince, had gone on to Stony Stratford without waiting for him. The person who actually met him at Northampton was the Duke of Buckingham, with 300 men. Do you know Buckingham? We have a nodding acquaintance. He was a friend of Edward's. Yeah, he arrived post-haste from London, with the news of what was going on. It's a fair deduction. He wouldn't bring 300 men just to express his condolences. Anyhow, a council was held there, and then he had all the materials for a proper council in his own train, and Buckingham's, and Rivers and his 3 aides were arrested and sent to the north, while Richard went on with the young prince to London. They arrived in London on the 4th of May. Well, that is very nice and clear, and what is clearest of all is that, considering times and distances, the sainted Moore's account of his writings sweet letters to the Queen to induce her to send only a small escort for the boy is nonsense. Bunk! Indeed, Richard did just what one would expect him to do. He must, of course, have known the provisions of Edward's will. What his actions suggest is just what one would expect them to suggest, his own sorrow and his care for the boy. A requiem mass and an oath of allegiance. Yeah. Where does the break in this orthodox pattern come? I mean, in Richard's behavior. Oh, not for a long time. When he arrived in London, he found that the Queen, the younger boy, the daughters, and her first marriage son Dorset had all bolted into sanctuary at Westminster. But apart from that, things seem to have been normal. Did he take the boy to the Tower? Carradine rifled through his notes. I don't remember. Perhaps I didn't get that. I was only... Oh, yes, here it is. No, he took the boy to Bishop's Palace in St. Paul's churchyard, and he himself went to stay with his mother at Baynard's Castle. Do you know where that was? I don't. Yes, it was the York's townhouse. It stood on the bank of the river just a little way west of St. Paul's. Oh, well, he stayed there until June the 5th, when his wife arrived from the north, and they went to stay in a house called Crosby Place." "It is still called Crosby Place. It has been moved to Chelsea, and the window Richard put into it may not still be there. I haven't seen it lately, but the building is there." "Is it?" Carradine said, delighted. "I'll go and see it right away. It's a very domestic tale when you think of it, isn't it? Staying with his mother until his wife gets to town, and then moving in with her. Was Crosby Place theirs, then?" "Richard had leased it, I think. It belonged to one of the aldermen of London, so there is no suggestion of opposition to his protectorship, or of change of plans when he arrived in London." "Oh, no. He was acknowledged protector before he ever arrived in London." "How do you know that?" "In the patent rolls, he is called protector on 2 occasions. Let me see. April 21st, that's less than a fortnight after Edward's death, and May the 2nd, that's 2 days before he arrived in London at all." "All right. I'm sold. And no fuss? No hint of trouble?" "Not that I can find. On the 5th of June, he gave detailed orders for the boy's coronation on the 22nd. He even had letters of summons sent out to the 40 squires who would be made Knights of the Bath. It seems that it was the custom for the king to knight them on the occasion of his coronation." "The 5th," Grant said musingly. "And he fixed the coronation for the 22nd. He wasn't leaving himself much time for a switch-over." "No, there's even a record of the order for the boy's coronation clothes." "And then what?" "Well," Carradine said, apologetic, "that's as far as I've got. Something happened at a council on the 8th of June, I think, but the contemporary account is in the memoirs of Philippe de Comines, and I haven't been able to get a hold of a copy so far. But someone has promised to let me see a copy of Mandrott's 1901 printing of it tomorrow. It seems that the Bishop of Bath broke some news to the council on June the 8th. Do you know the Bishop of Bath? His name was Stillington." "Never heard of him." "He was a Fellow of All Souls, whatever that is, and a Canon of York, whatever that may be." "Both learned and respectable, it appears." "Well, we'll see." "Have you turned up any contemporary historians, other than Comines?" "Not any so far who wrote before Richard's death. Comines had a French bias, but not a Tudor one, so he's more trustworthy than an Englishman writing about Richard under the Tudors would be. But I've got a lovely sample for you of how history is made. I found it when I was looking up the contemporary writers. You know that one of the things they tell about Richard III is that he killed Henry VI's only son in cold blood after the Battle of Tewkesbury? Well, believe it or not, the story is made up out of whole cloth. You can trace it from the very time it was first told. It's the perfect answer to people who say there's no smoke without fire. Believe me, this smoke was made by rubbing 2 pieces of dry stick together." "But Richard was just a boy at the time of Tewkesbury." "He was 18, I think, and a very bonny fighter by all contemporary accounts. They were the same age, Henry's son and Richard. Well, all the contemporary accounts, of whatever complexion, are unanimous in saying that he was killed during the battle, and then the fun begins." Carradine fluttered through his notes impatiently. "God darn it, what did I do with it? Ah, here we are. Now, Fabian, writing for Henry VII, says that the boy was captured and brought before Edward IV, was struck in the face by Edward with his gauntlet, and immediately slain by the king's servants. Nice. But Polydore Virgil goes one better. He says that the murder was done in person by George, Duke of Clarence, Richard, Duke of Gloucester, and William, Lord Hastings. Hall adds Dorset to the murderers. But that didn't satisfy Holinshed. Holinshed reports that it was Richard, Duke of Gloucester, who struck the first blow. How do you like that? Best quality Tony-pandy, isn't it? Pure Tony-pandy. A dramatic story with not a word of truth in it. If you can bear to listen to a few sentences of the Sainted Moor, I'll give you another sample of how history is made." "The Sainted Moor makes me sick at the stomach, but I'll listen." Grant looked for a paragraph he wanted and read. "Some wise men also ween that his drift, that is, Richard's drift, covertly conveyed, lacked not in helping forth his brother Clarence to his death, which he resisted openly, howbeit somewhat, as men deemed, more faintly than he that were heartily minded to his weal. And they who deem thus think that he, long time in King Edward's life, forethought to be king in case that the king his brother, whose life he looked that evil diet should shorten, should happen to decease, as indeed he did, while his children were young. And they deem that for this intent he was glad of his brother Clarence's death, whose life must needs have hindered him, so intending whether the same Clarence had kept true to his nephew, the young king, or enterprised to be king himself. But of all this point there is no certainty, and whoso divineth upon conjectures may as well shoot too far as too short. "The mean, burbling, insinuating old dotard," said Caroline sweetly. "Were you clever enough to pick out the one positive statement in all that speculation?" "Oh, yes." "You spotted it? That was smart of you. I had to read it 3 times before I got the one unqualified fact." "That Richard protested openly against his brother George being put to death." "Yes." "Of course, with all that men say stuff," Carradine observed, "the impression that is left is just the opposite. I told you I wouldn't have the sainted Moor as a present." "I think we ought to remember that it is John Morton's account and not the sainted Moor's." "The sainted Moor sounds better. Besides, he liked the thing well enough to be copying it out." Grant, the one-time soldier, lay thinking of the expert handling of that very sticky situation at Northampton. It was neat of him to mop up Rivers 2000 without any open clash. "I expect they preferred the king's brother to the queen's brother if they were faced with it." "Yes, and of course a fighting man has a better chance with troops than a man who writes books." "Did Rivers write books?" "He wrote the first book printed in England. Very cultured he was." "Huh! It doesn't seem to have taught him not to try conclusions with a man who was a brigadier at 18 and a general before he was 25. That's one thing that has surprised me, you know." "Richard's qualities as a soldier?" "No, his youth. I'd always thought of him as a middle-aged grouch. He was only 32 when he was killed at Bosworth." "Tell me, when Richard took over the boy's guardianship at Stony Stratford, did he make a clean sweep of the Ludlow crowd? I mean, was the boy separated from all the people he had been growing up with?" "Oh, no. His tutor, Dr. Alcock, came on to London with him for one." "So there was no panic clearing out of everyone who might be on the Woodville side, everyone who might influence the boy against him?" "Seems not. Just the 4 arrests." "Yes, a very neat, discriminating operation altogether. I felicitate Richard Plantagenet." "I'm positively beginning to like the guy. Well, I'm going along now to look at Crosby Place. I'm tickled pink at the thought of actually looking at a place he lived in. And tomorrow I'll have that copy of Comines, and I'll let you know what he says about events in England in 1483, and what Robert Stillington, Bishop of Bath, told the council in June of that year.
And that is where we are going to leave it for today. If you like what I do here, please like, subscribe, check the button, hit the bell, do the thing. Share me with all your friends, get me out there. And otherwise, I'll be seeing you guys next time. Bye!